Everybody, thank you for joining us for our presentation on opening doors today. Just a couple reminders, please keep your videos and microphones muted and off during the presentation. And also, if you have a question, please type them in the chat box and I will relay them to our presenter as we go along. So with further ado, we have Jennifer Henderson, who is amazing to work with. Director of Planning and Housing Development from North Dakota Housing Finance Agency with us today, and her presentation is on opening doors.
Well, Kylie, thank you. As Kylie said, my name is Jennifer Henderson, and I'm the Director of the Planning and Housing Development Division at North Dakota Housing Finance Agency. We administer financing programs to develop affordable housing, as mostly rental housing, as well as a few grant programs that help with accessibility upgrades and support community action agencies, single-family rehab programs as well. So we have kind of a vast array of programs that are housing related, as well as this program called Opening Doors, which is a landlord risk mitigation fund. Opening Doors was created out of the housing service collaborative meetings that we have with Money Follows the Person in each of our regions. And it was identified that the Fargo-Moorhead Landlord Risk Mitigation Program seemed to be rather successful, but it made sense that we needed something on a statewide basis. So we, in partnership with Money Follows the Person, located and were able to apply for Medicaid rebalancing dollars from the Department of Human Services to fund this initial piece of the program. So the Opening Doors program is fairly new. It's been up and running for about a year and a half now. So I'm just going to go through some brief information of the program and talk about the different participants that can be in the program and the different parties that are involved to make it work. And please, at any time, if you have questions, type them in the chat and we can pause at that point. The Opening Doors program was designed to provide households with an opportunity to access housing, but still protect the property and investments of owners and landlords. So its goal is to provide stable housing for clients that are enrolled in the program, but also that coverage of loss. The program can cover up to $2,000, and the term of the guarantee, or the coverage for the household participating in the program, is up to 18 months. That 18 months is dependent on how long services can be provided to that tenant, and I'll go through that in a little bit. And eligible claims include physical damages, which are in excess of normal wear and tear and exceed the security deposit, or lost revenue, which can include up to 2 months of non-payment of rent if a tenant doesn't vacate in good standing. There are 4 parties involved with the Opening Doors program in order to make it successful. First, there's a participating care coordination agency and their providers. Those are the providers that work with clients to help them locate the housing, to provide services they need to remain housed, and to refer them to other programs that may benefit them. Also, the covered clients. Those are clients that are willing to work towards goals that they have set, and they have had barriers to obtaining housing, such as poor credit, criminal conviction, bad rental history, past evictions, and anything that would produce a denial under normal rental criteria would qualify. A landlord or property manager who's willing to rent to a client who has had such barriers, but since they are working with an agency and covered under this program, are willing to take a risk on letting them be a tenant and signing a lease agreement. And then finally, North Dakota Housing Finance Agency as the administrators of the program. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what a participating care coordination agency provider, so a PCCA provider, what are their responsibilities? The provider is the one who identifies and refers eligible households into the program. We want to see that they've worked with the client to set individuals' goals, including how do they plan to pay for rent, and perhaps it is working on the issues that they had to create past barriers. Also being part of the leasing process, helping to search for housing that will be affordable to them, to review the lease agreement and participate in the pre-lease inspection, and help them apply for opening doors coverage. Additionally, providers need to provide monthly in-home visits with the clients. Obviously, during COVID-19, we respect that monthly in-home visits may not be available at all times, and so we are asking providers to still maintain contact with clients, but it may be via telehealth methods or other means. But hopefully in-home visits will be able to start at some point here again. Also, we expect that the providers are going to make quarterly contact with the landlord or leasing agent to ask them how things are going with the client and if there's any issues that maybe the client is not identifying in the monthly visits. And acting as a main point of contact for landlord if any tenancy concerns arise. So if a landlord is unable to reach a tenant to discuss some of the tenancy concerns that they might have, we are providing a point of contact through the PCCA provider so that they can touch base with the tenant as well. So who is eligible to enroll in opening doors? A client must meet all of the criteria outlined on this slide, including enrolled or eligible to enroll in Medicaid or Medicaid expansion. This guideline and criteria is a requirement of the rebalancing dollars that we received to start this program. Having an intellectual, developmental, physical, aging-related, or behavioral health condition, or youth exiting the foster care system. This requirement is self-identified by the client and the PCCA provider. Clients must also have a housing barrier. As I mentioned before, this can include anywhere from criminal activity, poor credit, bad rental history, anything that would disqualify a client under ordinary rental criteria. And then finally, and most importantly, we're looking for clients who are willing to actively participate in supportive services. The application process starts with the provider, who determines that a household meets the eligibility requirements. They then would submit an application to Opening Doors. North Dakota Housing Finance Agency will review that application and provide a commitment of coverage. At that time, the provider and the client will search for suitable housing, review the lease agreement, sign the lease, and perform the pre-lease inspection. We provide the commitment of coverage for 60 days to allow that client to search for suitable housing, and we'll give an extension on a case-by-case basis as necessary. Next, the client will sign the lease with the landlord, as you do in typical leasing arrangements. There are some other forms that are signed at this time as well, including a landlord participation agreement and a landlord communication agreement. These two documents really outline what is expected of the landlord in this process, which is pretty much acting as you usually do in a normal lease agreement situation. However, we do ask and request that a provider be a part of that process as well, and also that you would contact the provider if there are any tenancy concerns that begin to arise. Once all of those documents are signed and the lease agreement is executed, the provider would submit those documents to our agency and we will issue a certificate of coverage. The term of that coverage depends on how long the provider is able to provide supportive services. At minimum, 12 months, but it can be up to 18 months. We will also follow the lease agreement as far as the coverage duration. From there, as I mentioned before, there are reporting requirements with the provider. One is to make that monthly in-home visits or check-ins with the client. And that's to go over and identify if there's any tenancy concerns. And that can be from housekeeping issues to receiving a lease violation. Perhaps the client has lost their job and they need to be referred into employment services to help them get themselves back on track to pay their rent. Also, as I mentioned, we would like to see the provider contact the landlord on a quarterly basis and double check if there's any concerns from that side as well. How are we doing, Kylie? Is there any questions so far?
Not yet.
Okay. So those of you service providers that are on this line, if you feel that you are providing services to a client that would include helping them apply for housing, perhaps referring them into the housing authority to apply for rental assistance. It could be referring them into job service and other employment services, helping them with their addiction counseling, any of those things. If you are able to provide those services for at minimum a 12-month period, if the client is so willing to participate, please consider completing an application to become a provider. At that point, you will provide us with a list of authorized providers who provide those services to clients. We do require that each provider attend an initial training session and sign a program acknowledgement as part of the program. So as I mentioned, the landlord expectations. What is expected of a landlord is not that different than the regular tenant-landlord relationship. But as I mentioned, allowing the provider to participate. So allowing a pre-lease initial inspection of the unit and lease agreement, completing a move-in inspection, pre-lease move-in inspection, executing a lease agreement with a covered tenant, and contact with the provider if a concern arises, participating in those quarterly contacts from the provider, and also upon termination of the tenant or the end of their lease, to complete a final inspection report to identify if there's any damages or anything that we need to be aware of for claims. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about claims.
We do have a couple questions.
Sure, I'll stop there.
The first one, does this violate fair housing by making exceptions?
It does not. So the fair housing states that you must consistently apply your rental criteria to everyone. However, there are circumstances that a applicant may present to override what those criteria are. So for example, if a client says that, you know, I'd like you to consider me, I've had evictions, but here are the things that I've done to make sure that I am a good tenant again, you can make those considerations as long as another person who comes along with those same considerations would be allowed to rent as well. So you must consistently apply those exceptions, but you can make exceptions to that. And I'll kind of talk about that a little bit more when I visit about HUD's tenant screening criteria. Do you have another question out there, Kylie?
Yes. What happens if the person quits services?
So we have had that happen. And there's not a lot that we can do. What I can say is that the coverage will terminate, but we have never left a landlord hanging if there has been excessive damages. So typically, when a client has decided that they no longer want to participate in services, it has been because they have been spiraling towards eviction already, and they're just not wanting to participate in anything anymore, and so it's ended up in a claim. If we can, what we would like is to get that final inspection completed so that we can identify if there is any damages to the point of the end of their coverage. Does that answer the question, or is there a follow-up with that? Not yet.
Not yet. There is a couple other questions though.
Do you want to ask them?
From what you said and what was on the screen, a woman who has been a victim of domestic violence and on Medicaid does not qualify as she is not disabled, correct?
I would assume, so enrolling or eligible to enroll in Medicaid or Medicaid expansion is required. It is possible if a behavioral health condition includes addiction or anything of that nature. So there's probably something there, maybe not. It's possible that that might be an issue. That would be definitely case by case on that. And having a housing barrier, I would say most would have likely some issues with poor rent credit or something of that nature. So I think we could probably get there on most of them. But that's a really good question. I might have to research that one a little bit more and get back to you on that. Another question?
Can this be used with the rental bridge?
So the emergency rent bridge, the client already has a lease agreement. In this particular program, the applicant would not have a place to live today or a lease on their own today. So not likely. It would work though if somebody is enrolled in Opening Doors. This is an example of what I can see that would work. Somebody's enrolled in Opening Doors. They signed a lease agreement. They have a job and were working and paying their rent. And then all of a sudden they lost hours and started struggling to pay their rent. They would be able to qualify or apply for an emergency rent bridge and still maintain eligibility under Opening Doors program. But somebody who already has an apartment lease would not qualify for Opening Doors if they didn't enroll prior to their lease. Hope that answers that.
That seems to be it for right now.
All right. So let's talk about excessive damages. Excessive damages is over and above the requirements of a traditional unit turnover. The maximum claim that will be reimbursed cannot exceed $2,000, and it will be reduced by the security deposit if one was collected. Some items do have a depreciated value using average life calculation. An example of that is, let's say there is a 7-year-old refrigerator and the refrigerator is damaged. We wouldn't cover the entire cost of a new refrigerator. It would be depreciated based off of an average life calculation that we have. And so if you need more information on that, we can sure get it to you. Haven't had a fridge come up yet, but that is something that we would take into consideration, is age of the average life of that unit that was destroyed. Lost revenue, that does include legal costs related to evictions, rent that is owed but not collected, not to exceed 60 days, rent during vacant turnover that exceeds 30 days. So if the unit takes longer than 30 days to turn it over, we can have a claim of that rent that's lost during that period of time. And also any items such as utilities could be included depending on the lease terms. So if there is a loss of utilities that you are paying as a landlord on behalf of the tenant because of past due, then that may be covered. I do want to mention that the maximum coverage cannot exceed $2,000. So if you have both lost revenue and excessive damages, the total claim is $2,000. Landlords can participate in two different ways into this program. First is just accepting and opening doors covered household on a case-by-case basis, or second, becoming a participating landlord. To become a participating landlord, you complete a very simple form that says you're willing to participate in the program and that you allow us to provide your information to PCCA providers who are helping clients find housing. So we put you on a list if you are a participating landlord that you're willing to look at opening doors covered households. If you choose to just accept an opening door client on a case-by-case basis, we keep your information confidential and just let the process happen as it naturally would. So I'm going to give you a couple of things here. First is, how do you find out more information on the Opening Doors program? So the Opening Doors program is located on our website at ndhfa.org. And I'll bring that over here. This is our main webpage. Kylie, is this coming up okay?
Yes.
Great. So under the Ready to Rent is our rental programs. Opening Doors is the middle program under here. And it provides all of the information from an individual's perspective, from a PCCA provider perspective, as well as a landlord perspective. So landlords that are on the line today, if you'd like, go ahead and take a look at the landlord guide, frequently asked questions, the landlord expectations form, and the communication agreement. And those will really help you get a little bit more information about the program. The participation agreement, if you so desire, is located right underneath the landlord forms as well. Providers that are on the line, if you are interested in your agency becoming a PCCA providing agency, please take a look at the guide that is available and frequently asked questions. Some other information while I'm here that is of interest to some of you is some of our resources that are available. Also, we have finding rental housing links, including the link to Money Follows the Person housing database, which is really helpful in locating rental units throughout our state. So do take a look at our website when you have time.
There's a couple more questions that came in.
Sure.
Does the person with a disability, does the person with a disability have to be the head of household?
No, it does not. As an example that we were given one time and we discussed it, let's say the child has some behavioral issues and possibly led to the family being evicted from their prior unit, and they're working with a provider to help this child through their behavioral issues, and they also really need to apply for opening doors. We've said that we would be able to cover if the child is has behaviors and would lead them to not being able to qualify for an apartment. We would cover that person under that child under opening doors. Obviously the household would have to apply, but somehow we have to know that it's the child that is the covered client, if that makes sense.
Okay. Can you give some names, examples of who are current PCCAs?
Yes. Let's see. So Lutheran Social Services is a provider. YouthWorks. We have Senka in the Fargo area. Independence Inc. in the Minot area. And let me actually see if I can pull up some more information here. Right now we have 15 organizations that are participating in opening doors. Center Inc., Choice Recovery, F5 Project, the VA is participating, West Central Human Service Center, and Southeast and South Central Human Service Centers are some examples of participating organizations today.
Okay. I work primarily with FTR clients and am looking for more information or resources to use when trying to work with landlords and property managers for successful tenancy for my clients. Most are being rejected initially or automatically due to the felony convictions. They are not given an opportunity to explain or plead their case to the landlords. How can we break this barrier?
The thing that I would suggest with that is actually helping that client to write their story. And rather than having the background check find the felony as part of the initial application process when you're applying, tell that landlord what criminal convictions are going to be found likely on the background check, and that, you know, here are the things that I've been working on, and pleading the case up front and seeing if that helps break it by creating that relationship up front rather than waiting for the landlord to say, oh, I found a felony on your record, you're done. So it's really trying to build that relationship as you are applying would be a suggestion. I'd love to hear if there is a landlord on the line who would have any other point of views for that. And that kind of segues into HUD's guidance on tenant selection policy. HUD has come out with a couple different things that we're really discussing criminal background and ensuring that we are not having a fair housing disparate impact on individuals that don't meet criteria due to criminal background. So some best practices that were discussed in HUD's guidance that they published April 4th, 2016, is to carefully consider what types of crimes pose the greatest threat. Crimes against people or property, involving drugs or weapons or sexual misconduct. HUD says, you know, don't use arrest records. And I believe for those of you who participated in the tenant screening session that was held a couple weeks ago from Cass County Housing Authority, he indicated the same guidance as well, is that arrest records really shouldn't be used. It should be criminal convictions. Apply that background check consistently, but allow case-by-case considerations of mitigating factors. And I've on this screen listed some of those mitigating factors. So really consider the seriousness of the criminal offense, possibly the length of time since the offense, especially if there's significant periods of good behavior, the number and nature of other criminal convictions, and then evidence of rehab, such as employment, participation in job training programs, education, drug or alcohol treatment programs. All of those are evidence of rehabilitation that could be a mitigating circumstance for you to consider someone who might be outside of your normal rental criteria. And also tenancy supports that they are accessing during tenancy. So it's definitely recommended that you consider those mitigating circumstances, but consider them consistently. It's important to have policies and procedures written of giving examples of what you would consider a mitigating circumstance. And if somebody presents one of those mitigating circumstances, then you follow through with it. Any other questions, Kylie?
Yes.
I'm ready.
I'm not sure if this is a question or a state. They just commented that the Cass County guy was Derek Johnson, who did an excellent job.
Yep, he sure did. If you have not seen the tenant screening session, it is on replay on YouTube, right, Kylie?
Yes.
Definitely go out there and take a look at his presentation if you haven't. While we're waiting for some other questions, if they do come in, I'll give you some opening door statistics today. We've had 39 applicants apply for the program. 16 of them were unable to secure housing, and 23 have been covered under the program. As of yesterday, 4 have made it to the end of their lease without claim. 3 moved to a different unit or situation, and they didn't have a claim, so that's 7 successes in my mind. 6 have been evicted, and claims have been paid, and there's 10 currently enrolled in the program. So to date, we've paid out a little under $10,000. Our average claim is about $1,300. And as far as the types of clients that have been enrolling in the program or applying for it, 28 or more have had misdemeanors or felonies. Some had both. Some had misdemeanor and not a felony. 32 have claimed prior drug eviction. So of the 39 applicants, 32 of them have claimed that they have had prior drug addictions. Bad credit, rental history are also pretty high on the list for those that have applied for enrollment in the program. As I mentioned, we have 15 organizations that are participating, which equates to about 100 providers. They do cover a majority of the state. It is still a little light in Western communities such as Williston, but the VA VASH group has signed on, and I think that's going to give us some coverage in the Williston area.
We have one more question.
Sure.
Do you help sex offenders?
Sex offenders are allowed to apply for this program. We've had 2 so far that have participated. There is no criminal conviction that will preclude somebody from participating in the program. It is still, though, if a landlord has a hard stop on sex offenders within their property, that is allowable. So, you know, if somebody's enrolled in Opening Doors and their criminal conviction is a lifetime registrant sex offender, and you say no to that and consistently say no, that is perfectly acceptable. And then the next person in Opening Doors has maybe just a misdemeanor drug conviction, and you allow them in. That is different because the criminal convictions are substantially different. So definitely different mitigating circumstances there. Anything else, Kylie?
Not at this time.
Oh boy, I figured this was going to be a short session on things. What I do want to mention is Nancy Rice is our program administrator for the Opening Doors. So she is the main point of contact if you as a landlord, a PCCA provider, have any questions on how to enroll in the program. If you're a provider and you've taken our training but haven't referred a client into the program yet, reach out to her and she can walk you through any of the forms or questions that you might have. Typically, enrolling someone for the first time into the program, even though you've had the training, it's still different when you're working with a client for that first time. So do reach out to her. She'd be more than happy to walk you through anything.
Jennifer, this is Cheryl. Can you pull up your 2 forms that the PCCA and the landlord have to fill out? I was amazed at how simple they were. So if you could pull up.
Sure. So the landlord expectation form, we'll pull that one up first. And I bet I need to get it so you can see it. So this outlines the expectations of the landlord, which is to provide the PCCA provider with a copy of a lease agreement and house rules so that they can discuss them with the client during the application process. And also to provide the provider with a copy of a signed lease agreement once that is taken care of, allowing them to participate in the pre-lease inspection. The landlord provides affordable and well-maintained housing, communicate with the provider if there are any problems that arise, and then quickly notify us if there's a claim that's going to come. So yep, that's a pretty simple one. Participation acceptance, that's about it with that. The communication agreement, this is the way that the PCCA provider gives you as a landlord their contact information. This form is really just a reminder of if you have concerns and your tenant is not communicating with you, please contact the PCCA provider. They should fill out this contact information, and we give some examples of why it would make sense for you to contact them. The participation agreement, I'll look at that too while we're on here. This is a pretty simple form as well. It allows you to, again, we're going to share your information with providers. You still can check barriers that you're a hard no on, including sex offender, if that is something that you are a hard no on participating. And then we reiterate the landlord expectations. You can choose to no longer be a participating landlord at any time by contacting us, and we'll quickly remove you from our list. Is there another form you were thinking of, Cheryl?
Nope, that was it. It's just one page and just a couple of questions.
Couple questions. Frequently asked questions, definitely something you'll want to take a look at as a landlord and the provider as well.
We have a question. Can you be a hard no on high risk sex offenders and okay with low risk sex offenders?
Those are two different risk levels. In my opinion, you know, if your policies and procedures are specific of that nature, that would make sense. Anything else?
Not that I can see.
Jennifer, this is Cheryl. I got one more for you. If somebody has late fees for their rent and then they end up getting evicted for lack of payment, is that included in the $2,000? So can the late be included?
It could be. It's lost revenue. Yeah.
I think that's all the questions I have.
Yeah, a few of the claims that we've received lately include both lost revenue and damages. And we're just looking for, you know, the description and details of each of them, including there's typically the tenant, what's it called? It's kind of their ledger, and it'll show all of their fees associated with that client, including with the tenant, including the back rent. The late fees get tacked on there. We usually see the subtraction of the security deposit, and then the damages, excessive cleaning that may have been required or anything. And so that tenant ledger is an important part of the claims process. We also look for attorney fees. So that's typically an invoice from the attorney. If you do get a judgment from the tenant, on the tenant, we would look to reduce that from the total claim. In those situations, though, it's been well over the $2,000 maximum. So between the judgment and ours, you're getting closer to whole, I guess, if you ever do get the judgment back.
And I know that you had talked at one point about looking for additional funding to help populations that don't fall into this category. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we are continually looking for additional funding. And, you know, at this point, we haven't found any, but it is something, you know, to consider. Free through recovery is something that we may have a discussion with them, whether or not we look to cover any free through recovery participant, if there was extra funding available for that as well, because some free through recovery participants do not qualify for Medicaid, especially if they're employed. And so that would be a gap in our coverage ability there. And now I feel like the question with regard to the domestic violence victim, you know, if they can't mark any of those conditions, that would be not eligible to apply, unfortunately. So that's also something to look at that point. The behavioral health condition, that second bullet on the screen, that is also a condition of, and I'll go back to that real quick, sorry to make you guys dizzy. The second bullet here is also a part of the criteria that came with the funding from rebalancing dollars. So that's why that is there. And so I really think you could probably get there for most, but there might be some that wouldn't.
And
anything else?
Yeah, with the foster, the kids exiting foster care, what type of barriers are you seeing for their housing? Is it the credit or?
Most of it is zero rental history, zero credit, nobody to co-sign. So they're kind of starting anew and maybe have had some criminal backgrounds or other trouble that's showing up on their background. And so that has not started out as a very good tenant candidate from the get-go. So that's kind of what we're seeing with that age group.
Okay, seriously, that was my last question.
They're great questions. I appreciate them, Cheryl. Well, like I said, one, if you haven't seen Derek's presentation on tenant screening, do go back and take a look at that one. Consider these mitigating circumstances as part of your acceptance of applicants. Allow them to provide you a story of what they've been working on in order to better themselves from their past, because people do overcome some of those barriers. And if we could just give them chances with support under opening doors and the right pre and post tenancy services being provided, the likelihood of success is definitely a lot higher than somebody who isn't receiving any type of assistance or services. The PowerPoint did go out prior, as well as some links to our website. So take a look at them, contact Nancy if you have any other questions about the program, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you all for attending. There will be a survey sent out here in a little while, so if you could please take a few minutes to fill that out, that would be great. Any feedback and all feedback is greatly appreciated as we continue to do these virtual landlord trainings. So thank you again for attending, and hope you guys have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.